Oh, hello, and good afternoon. It's Mr. Intihar. It's Wednesday, 29th of April, but depending on when you're watching this video, it'll be a date later than today. Anyway, this is a lesson looking at To Build a Fire by Jack London. If you haven't yet read the story, could you please read the story first before you watch this video? So stop the video. Go read the story. It might take you a couple sittings. It's not terribly long. It is a short story, but it's a really good short story. And there will be spoilers in this video if you haven't watched the video yet. Right. If you have read the story and you're continuing with the video, get the story in front of you in PDF form if possible, if you've got it on your device, because it was attached in the Teams. And I'm just going to go through it a little bit. Now, if you're watching this video, it means you're about to do, are doing, or you're about to do Nat 5, currently doing Nat 5, or you'll be doing higher, even possibly. And regardless of which of these categories you fall into, being able to analyze a piece of literature and understand how it works and why it works the way it does is really crucial. And this story is a great one to kind of help build those skills. So one of the things, or a few of the things that we should always keep in mind when we're reading a piece of prose, and remember, prose are three main types of literature that we'll do in school, are poetry, so it's broken up into lines and stanzas or verses, drama, so it's broken up into character parts, and it can also have scenes and acts, such as Shakespeare and many other playwrights. Or it's prose, which means it's broken up into sentences and paragraphs. So this is a piece of prose, sentences and paragraphs. It's a short story, it's not a novel, but a newspaper article, that's also prose, but it's not a piece of fiction. So anyway, so a couple of things that you need to always be thinking about or the narrative voice, for example. So in this story, as I'm sure you'll recognize, it's third person. And they're very much like an observer as to what's going on in the story. So like I've said before, I think in the first video on To Build a Fire, you've got the main character who's the man traveling, and you've got the other character really who's the dog that's traveling with him. And there's quite a difference between the two of them. But the person telling the story is the narrator, and the narrative voice is third person, and they're kind of just observing for most of the story. They're not really kind of casting judgments, though there are a couple of places where you do get what we can call authorial comment, where it's almost as if the writer is kind of making an opinion or showing an opinion on what's happening in the story by something they say or the way they say it, or perhaps punctuation that they use. So that happens in a couple of places in the story. So narrative voice. Setting. You know, Yukon, winter. Enough said, not very much light, incredible cold, the kind of cold that most of us can't even really conceive, the kind of cold like it happens in the story. He spits water out of his mouth, and before it hits the ground, it's ice. It's really, really cold. Life-threateningly cold. So if you're not careful, you can die. So the setting is really important. Characterization. So how the character is revealed. And that's a really important technique, that regardless if it's a play, a poem, if you've got a character in it, a short story, a novel, how the character is developed and revealed to the reader is a really crucial part of it. Theme. So the main idea, like I was talking in the first video on this story, the theme in this one that we're going to keep coming back to is hubris. So this idea of kind of an inflated or exaggerated sense of I am awesome. So it's very much a kind of arrogance, and this character shows that in abundance. We're also going to talk a wee bit at the start about symbolism. And certainly one of the strongest or the most potent symbols in the story is the fire. So if you think about what fire symbolizes in society or in our civilization, to our species, it's probably, not probably, it's one of the oldest tools that we have created. So they reckon people have been using fire. I've heard different figures. I've heard something as old as 70,000 years. People have been using fire. Some are older, some are not quite as old, but literally for tens of thousands of years, human beings have been using fire. And one of the things fire symbolizes is civilization. The idea that you've moved along as a species to the next point. Warmth, protection, morale boosting. Like, it picks up your mood, it picks up your morale when things are looking like they're not going very well. So a fire can do all these different things. Cooking, it helps with weapons. So for example, you can harden wood in fire to make, arrow tips, for example, or spear tips stronger by putting them into fire. So there's all these different things that we get from fire as a species. And now, if you think about this man, or the way the story starts, the setting is, let's keep that in my pocket. The setting is right from the very first sentence. You get a sense of what this place is going to be like, where the story takes place. So the very first sentence, day had dawned cold and gray when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail. So if you got cold and gray, what does cold suggest? Inhospitable. So the word inhospitable is a great one. It basically means, somewhere where it's not very easy to live. Uninviting is another way of putting it. Uncomfortable. And so all those things right from that very first sentence, as far as describing the setting where this story is going to take place is very important. Gray. What do you think of the word gray? If you describe somebody's face as being gray, are they full of health? Are they full of life? Are they looking forward to the next stage of their lives? I don't know. No, usually when we're thinking about gray, quite lifeless, bland, kind of dull, boring, unappealing. So already from the very first sentence, and when you're reading any piece of literature, keeping in mind how it starts is really important, because this first paragraph, it goes on to describe a couple of things to do with the environment, how cold it is, but also the man. And we get a sense early on in the story anyway that he seems quite capable. He's not a complete numpty. He's not a complete novice. It is the first time that he has been in this environment, and that's really important to remember. And the author makes a really, at this time of year, and the author makes a repeated mention of that fact. But, we find out that, however, there seemed to be an indescribable darkness over the face of things. That's kind of ominous. It doesn't seem like a positive kind of thing. This is still in the first paragraph. That was because the sun was absent from the sky. This fact did not worry the man. He was not alarmed by the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun. So it's almost like from the very first paragraph, oh wow, it's a tough, rough, inhospitable place, but this guy, he can handle it. He's got this. He's not alarmed. He's not freaked out. So he seems quite kind of resilient from the get-go. However, by the time we get to the next page, so I've printed it out. My pages, the pages that are on the PDF, so it would be number 2 of the PDF, but at the bottom of each page, it's got the actual page number, so it's page 65. There's a great paragraph here where we start to find out a little bit more about the man and what his weakness is. And his ultimate weakness really is described in this paragraph on page 65, and I'll just read it out. The trouble with him was that he was not able to imagine. And this lack of imagination, it did not lead him to consider his weakness as a creature affected by temperature, nor did he think about man's general weakness, able to live only within narrow limits of heat and cold. From there, it did not lead him to thoughts of heaven and the meaning of a man's life. When he thinks about the temperature, that it should be more important than that was a thought that never entered his head. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there to unpick. And I think my favorite, well, my favorite, it's the ultimate tragedy with this guy. The trouble with him was that he was not able to imagine. And I think that's really crucial. You know, this idea of not being able, what does it mean not being able to imagine? It means not being able to kind of put your mind into a place and a time where it currently isn't. Like if I'm sitting here right now, standing here in front of you, can I actually imagine of what it's like for doctors and nurses working in a hospital where they're dealing with really, really sick people and perhaps not having enough equipment to do that? I can. Why? Because I've been reading things, I've been listening to things, and because I do imagination and thinking about things that aren't immediately around me is something that I kind of just do as a natural kind of part of my life. So I can imagine what it'd be like, and as a result, I can feel empathy for these people. You know, I can try and put myself, even though it's ultimately not possible, but I can try and put myself in the place of these people who are doing these incredible things to try and save people's lives in often very, very difficult situations. And empathy, if we're talking back to like what I said, what the point of studying English is, one of the things that English and literature does is help us develop empathy, the ability to put ourselves into somebody else's place. So one of the things this shows is that he lacks empathy. Because one of the things that happens regularly through the story, and I realize now it's already 12 minutes 20, I'm going to turn this into a two-parter video, and that's okay. This will be part one. This idea that he doesn't really feel for the people who have been trying to tell him. So the locals, specifically there's this guy mentioned, this old man from Sulphur Creek, who gave him advice. He said all kinds of different things to him. About how he should travel in this part of the world at this time of year. And it seems like the main character, whose name we never even learn, and that's kind of always interesting when you don't learn a character's name. What does that mean? Does it mean that it doesn't really matter what his name was because he's just being a bit too arrogant anyway? But certainly he has no empathy, or can't put himself in the place of somebody else, and so that's really important. It also means, because it goes on to say that it did not lead him to thoughts of heaven and the meaning of a man's life. He can't picture his own death or mortality. So mortality, meaning that, you know, this knowledge or realization that he is going to die at some point. And I think that's really important, because he's in a situation that is literally life and death. And if he doesn't possess the right skills, and if he doesn't do the right things, he will die purely because of where he is when he's there. Winter, Arctic Circle, or near enough to the Arctic Circle, will kill a human if they don't know what they're doing, if they make mistakes. You know, here in Edinburgh, Scotland, April, you know, you might get a bit cold, you might get a bit of hypothermia possibly. But in the summertime, it's not lethal weather, but we're talking about lethal weather. And so this idea that he can't picture his own death or mortality is a really important point that we learn about this character at the start. Furthermore, if you think about another goal of literature or of English, well, not just English, but literature in any language, is to try and work out what is the point of us being here. And if that's something that you haven't asked yourself at any time recently, it's really important to consider, why are we here? And so when it says early on, the cold, it did not lead him to thoughts of heaven and the meaning of a man's life. So that's also on page 2 or page 65. So this idea, you know, that first bit, he's clearly not spiritual. He's not religious. And, you know, you don't have to be religious. You don't even really have to be spiritual. I think ultimately, though, the older you get, the more you might realize, hey, wait a minute, is this really all there is about, you know, being human, just what we can see in front of us? Is there something more? Is there something we can think about deeper? He doesn't seem to have thought about things very deeply, and certainly, you know, he's not philosophical, because if you think about what philosophy does, it kind of focuses people's minds onto deeper matters, so that you're not just thinking about, you know, the existence of reality as it is now, but more about, you know, why, or what is the point of it. There should be a point, because if you don't think about what the point of your existence is, then how do you make the most of your existence? But anyway, that might be getting a little too deep just now. But you know, not interested in things beyond the surface. So it's almost like, you know, just like it's kind of not, it's not wise to look at somebody and judge who they are as a person purely by the way they look, purely because of the surface appearance of that person. The same way, you know, you shouldn't really just look at life in that kind of way, like just on the surface. Oh, it's cold, so I must do this. You know, you should think about, you know, why do I have to do this? And this guy clearly doesn't take it that much farther, because he's not interested in things beyond the surface. And ultimately, this is going to be what leads partially to his downfall. So I think we're going to stop there, because it's already a 17-minute video. I'll put the next one up in the next day or two, but I know classes are changing over next week, so it's going to be more just an opportunity for people who are following along with these videos to kind of be thinking about literature, be thinking about stories, and be thinking about how to analyze things when we get to them. But I'll put up video 2 either tomorrow or on Friday, okay? Bye! Intihar out.